Joining me now from Melbourne is the Assistant Treasurer, Michael Sukkar. Michael Sukkar, thanks for joining us. So Thursday afternoon, Scott Morrison says there is going to be a national emergency declared for Queensland. Friday night, there is not. Can you explain to us what happened here?
Well, Andrew, obviously I've seen your remarks and you obviously showed the Prime Minister's remarks there. A request wasn't made and obviously the ordinary course of events and the requirements are of such a declaration that a request is made from the government of the affected area. That request wasn't made. But having said that, notwithstanding a declaration or otherwise, ADF support was provided immediately. Support to flood-affected communities was provided immediately. The declaration, which I believe are really important for that recovery phase of a disaster, has been decided by, obviously, the Premier and the Queensland Government that it's not necessary to request that declaration. I think it's as simple as that, Andrew. But right now, with communities impacted in Queensland and northern New South Wales, our focus wholly is on supporting them, and sort of a forensic timeline of who said what and when might be interesting to some people, but I don't think is of any relevance to those on the ground whom we're supporting.
I understand that, Mr. Sukkar, but speaking of a forensic timeline, we see this Sunday Telegraph story today detailing how Defence made 2 requests to come in and help, and the New South Wales State Emergency Service rebuffed those requests. Why didn't the Prime Minister call it a national emergency then, if the federal government had the belief that Defence should be in then? And that was a week earlier than he did.
Well, Defence was on the ground extraordinarily quickly. I don't think anybody doubts that. So Defence was deployed very quickly. Again, the requests or the declarations of emergency rely on requests being made by state governments. That's wholly appropriate. State governments
but according to the legislation,
are on the ground.
Mr. Sukkar, according to the legislation, you don't need that letter, do you? You can just go in as a federal government, can't you?
Sure.
Why did the Prime Minister say?
Andrew.
Why did the Prime Minister say he needed the letters from New South Wales and Queensland?
To make the declaration, you do, Andrew, but to provide support immediately, which we did through the ADF particularly. I mean, that happened before and can happen without a declaration being made. So I think you've got to separate the two, Andrew. There's a declaration which makes, in my view, and this is my view, it makes the reconstruction task and recovery task much easier because it empowers all Commonwealth agencies to do what they need to do to support those communities without any encumbrance. But the initial deployment of assets and support, of course that would be coordinated with a state government. You would expect that wouldn't be coordinated with local SES, obviously, which reports through to state government, local emergency management services at a state government level. It would be wholly inappropriate, Andrew, for us not to be coordinating with the state government on the ground. So those deployments were made prior to and can be made without a declaration being made, and ultimately the declaration requires a request from the state government. Where that request is forthcoming, we have absolutely made the declaration and supported the state government. Where it hasn't, in the case of Queensland, well, we'll continue to support them on the ground with ADF support. We continue to support communities with disaster recovery payments, significant support. We've obviously continued to support through funding, joint funding with the New South Wales Government, $551 million for housing support. So
Mr.
the support
Sukkar,
can happen regardless, Andrew.
Just on that support, it leads me into the Lismore-Ballina question. Will we see areas like Ballina, Mullumbimby given these $1,000 payments? Is that under consideration, or are you going to stay where you are now, only those 3 local government areas?
Well, Andrew, I'm not privy to those discussions. I think the basic point always here is where people need the support, where they've been affected in a significant way by a natural disaster, we've always sought to support those communities. So there's always questions around which communities affected more and at what point, where the line falls on a map. but we'll always support communities where people have been significantly affected by natural disaster. But as to the specifics of those discussions, I'm obviously not privy to them.
All right. Well, in the lead up to the budget, petrol prices and the cost of living a big issue. Will we see a cut to petrol excise in the budget? Is that something you support?
Well, Andrew, I'm obviously not going to foreshadow anything that may or may not be in the budget. I think your question is a good one, though, because it raises the issue that I think we're all seeing in the community, and that is that cost of living is a significant issue. Fortunately for the Australian economy, we have historically low unemployment rate of 4.2%. We've obviously delivered significant personal income tax cuts to millions and millions of Australians and households, which is literally putting money back in their pockets. Tax cuts that were hard fought for, I might add, by the Morrison government. But there's no doubt that the budget will seek to build the recovery, ensure that we keep our foot on the economic accelerator, but also will take into account the fact that households, are feeling the pressures of cost of living, and that will be something, Andrew, that is certainly a focus of the budget.
And Josh Frydenberg said today, just factor in an interest rate rise. Is that fair comment?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think market consensus is confirmed on this, that, the consensus of the market is an interest rate rise in the second half of the year. Now, in the end, the Reserve Bank makes these decisions, not the government. But it just shows that, in a world of great economic and political instability, yes, we have, an economic recovery underway, but it can't be taken for granted, and there'll undoubtedly be speed bumps into the future, and that's why the Australian economy will require careful management. It will require careful management from a government that has the runs on the board as far as growing the economy, reducing taxes, keeping businesses afloat during the pandemic, and that's what we will be conveying to the Australian people through the budget and into the election, that our economic recovery is not assured. We're in good shape, but we still need to make wise decisions in a period of time where there is great instability in the world.
Mr Sukkar, just briefly on a couple of matters. Will we see more money for mental health in the budget coming out of that pandemic situation? You've obviously suffered from it down there in Victoria, more lockdowns than anyone else. Will that be a focus of the budget?
Look, good question, Andrew. Again, I obviously can't confirm one way or another what's going to be in the budget, but I think you and the Australian public have seen a significant emphasis from particularly the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, and the Prime Minister, and of course Assistant Minister David Coleman on mental health. You're right. As a Victorian, I can say, without being too parochial, I think Victorians have done it tougher than anybody else and are feeling the strains of that. So I think it creates an environment where there's certainly a lot of support within the government to build on what we've already done, the billions of dollars we've already additionally put into mental health. But everyone will have to wait for budget night to see precisely what we say in that space.
And just finally, if you could say some words in relation to Kimberly Kitching and her sad passing.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, it's sort of difficult for all of us. I was fortunate to have spent last Saturday night with Kimberly and her husband, Andrew. I never thought that would be the last time I saw her and spoke to her. She was a wonderful friend and someone who, as you've seen this week and as all your viewers have seen this week, had respect across the political spectrum, because she was always working for Australia's best interests. She wasn't petty in a partisan way. Where there were big issues that affected our country and that she could get support across the political divide for, she worked hard to do that. She was a real warrior for her cause. Obviously, I was friends with Kimberly, so I'm biased, but I think she is a huge loss to the Parliament, a huge loss to the Labor Party. And, at times like this, you just reflect on trying to make sure that every interaction with our friends and loved ones, leave a lasting and positive impression. Because if anyone had have told me that last Saturday night when I spent some time with Kimberly that would be the last time I saw her, I wouldn't have really believed it. So a huge loss to the country, a huge loss to the Labor Party, and obviously our condolences to Andrew and their family on such a huge loss.
Michael Sukkar, thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Andrew.